Alright, today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula, and we're going to get started with the basics here. To use the quadratic formula, you always want this to equal out to 0. And also, we need to know that there's an invisible 1 in front of that x to the second right there. So what you're going to do to start off here is just bubble everything up. And because we want this side to equal 0, what we'll do is we'll add 15 to the negative 15, or you can think of it as a positive 15, whatever works better for you. Those are going to cancel out, so that's going to equal 0 now. Think of this like a scale though. If you add 15 pounds to one side, it's going to be 15 pounds heavier than the other. Since we need this to be equal, we're going to add 15 to this side as well. And now your equation is going to look like this. So keep in mind, you cannot add the 15 to either one of these because these are all unlike terms, different t-charts. And this is our goal, is to always get it to look like this. So I'll introduce the quadratic formula here in a second, but our goal is to always get it to look like this form right here. In other words, highest exponent in the front, the one without the exponent in the third position, and a 0 at the end. So if I had a problem like this, as we can see, the last one looked different than this one because the last one had an x right here. You want this one to have an x as well if you're going to get this set up for the quadratic formula. Now there are different ways to solve this problem, but we're dealing with the quadratic formula in this specific example. So since there is no x here, we can represent that by putting 0x there. And now this one will be ready for the quadratic formula as well. So it's important to note that when we use the quadratic formula, the 1 will be called A, the 0 will be called B, and the 8 will be called C. And let me give you one more example here. Okay, so again, we want an A, a B, and a C. In this example, my 2 would be my A, my negative 5 would be my B. I do not have a C. However, we could add a 0 to this problem without changing it. We can add a 0 to anything. And now I've got a C. So this would be my A, this would be my B, this would be my C. It's important that you keep those in this order. In other words, when I added this 0, I do not want to add it here and say that this is A, this is B, and that is C. Again, you want to keep this in standard form, which means that these should descend. Higher exponent, lower exponent, there's an invisible 1 there. And one with no exponent, it's called a constant, and goes at the end. So A would be 2, B would be negative 5, C would be 0. And those are the basics to get this set up for the quadratic formula. Now I'll give you an example of one that's already set up for the quadratic formula. Again, we want this order, so this is looking good. We got the higher exponent before the lower exponent and the constant at the end. Again, since this does not have a number, we need to know there's a 1. And this is the quadratic formula right here. Now it looks a little intimidating if this is your first time attempting this. And I would say don't be so concerned with memorizing the formula. Be more concerned with how to use the formula. You can always get this in your notes. Okay, so again, it equals 0. If this equaled anything other than 0, this quadratic formula is not going to work. So in this example, a would be equal to 1, b would be equal to positive 8, and c would be equal to positive 15. Okay, so now what we're going to do is start plugging in our variables and substituting them in, the numbers in place of the variable. So 2 times a would mean 2 times 1, which we know is going to be 2, obviously. Negative b is going to be negative 8. And b to the second would be 8 to the second, so 8 times 8. And 4 times a times c means 4 times 1 times 15. And we can erase these parentheses now. It's important to keep those parentheses in there until this point, because sometimes you'll end up with double negatives. And people that don't put the parentheses in, sometimes they lose track of one of those negatives. Then we're going to do 64 minus 60, which is 4. And then we know the square root of 4 is 2. And then at this point, you do negative 8 plus 2. You can always t-chart those, which will give you a negative 6. Still have a 2 on the bottom. And then for the next part, we could do negative 8 minus 2, which will give you a negative 10 if you t-chart those two together. And then you reduce that down, you'll get negative 3. Reduce that down, you'll get negative 5. And those will be the two answers.